Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Adam, and I'll be your moderator. Before we begin, just a few things to note. First of all, we are recording today's webinar, so we'll get that out to you as soon as we can this week. Secondly, if there are any questions during the webinar, please drop them in the Q&A section, and we'll answer them live at the end. And lastly, as a thank you for attending today's webinar, we'll be sending out $5 coffee gift cards, so check your inbox later today for your gift. Matt and Greg, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, everybody. I appreciate you joining us today for our Partner Spotlight webinar with Lacework. So just to kick us off, Greg, you want to give a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure thing. Thanks, Matt. Hey, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Greg Foss. I'm a principal cloud security researcher with Lacework.
Hey, everybody. My name is Matt Hastings, and I lead product management here at Red Canary. So to kick us off, just wanted to kind of walk through what the agenda is going to look like today for the next 30 minutes or so. The first thing we wanted to do is kind of really introduce you to some of the types of threats that we see, impacting the cloud, and how some are different and how some may be similar to some of the threats we see on traditional corporate networks or corporate endpoints. Next, we'll give you a bit of a primer on who Lacework is, who Red Canary is, and then finally we'll wrap up with what a joint solution and what a joint partnership between Lacework and Red Canary really looks like. There will be time for a Q&A, so we'll do that at the end. So go ahead and drop your questions as we go, and we'll answer those at the end as time permits. So as we get started, at the highest level, there are really kind of three key attack techniques that we see that help threat actors kind of land or exploit their way into cloud environments. And these shouldn't necessarily look new to most folks who've been around in the security industry for a while. However, some of the ways that threat actors are using them to get into this infrastructure is novel and new. And so the first is really just around misconfiguration. So cloud security policies, access controls, ultimately allowing adversaries to access things like data, workloads that they really shouldn't be able to. A real common example of this would be a improperly provisioned S3 bucket that is ultimately exposed to public and allows anyone to read it. The second, these things would be exposed access keys. You think your developers or DevOps folks who are committing code constantly, deploying it into the cloud, inadvertently might commit a private access key into a public repo that then an attacker can use to gain access into that infrastructure. The last one, is really around deployed production web applications that may have vulnerabilities that an attacker could ultimately exploit and then gain access into the underlying cloud infrastructure. And then, at this point, the attacker has some initial access, they have a footing, and there's a whole bunch of things they can do from there. So, typically, we'll see things like an attacker could spin up infrastructure to mine cryptocurrencies. They could also start deploying ransomware. And this is where, folks like Greg, who's really experienced here in the cloud and the cloud attack vectors, I'd pass it over to you to kind of explain, what you and what Lacework are really seeing in this area.
Yeah, thanks so much, Matt. And you're exactly right. I think, you hit the nail on the head with kind of those main key items that are kind of the catalyst for people being able to gain access to cloud infrastructure and especially impact the cloud management plane directly. And so, for me, like when I came into doing research in the cloud side of things, a lot of it was generally new to me. I'd come from more traditional endpoint sort of telemetry and that side of things. And so when I started diving into cloud, one of the ways that really helped me kind of understand the whole dynamics of how different cloud attacks are versus what we'd see in, say, a traditional ransomware attack is kind of this example I want to walk you all through here. And so when we're looking at how someone might execute a ransomware attack on traditional environments, talking like encrypting servers, laptops, file contents, those kind of things, each one of these items here that's highlighted in green are essentially steps that the adversary is going to have to go through in order to be successful in executing a ransomware attack. And each one of these steps is kind of different points of detection potential. That's kind of how I like to highlight those, because the more of these that they have to perform, the more likely it is for them to trip one of your wires along the way and give you indication that something's going on and head them off before they get to that final impact component there. Now the yellow ones, I put those in yellow because it's not always necessary in ransomware. They are often included in ransomware, especially when we talk double extortion and those types of attacks. But in general, the ones in green, adversaries are always going to really kind of have to do. Now, if we go to the next slide and take a look at what this compares to when we look at a cloud ransomware attack, there's a lot of steps here that are generally skipped. And the recon one, we highlighted there because they do have to do reconnaissance. And I would argue that's kind of a majority of the activity is going to take place there. But that's not an area where you're going to have any telemetry. So really, we're looking at you have to catch them at that initial access point and then look for them doing discovery inside the environment. Usually that's combined with kind of exfiltration. Usually a lot of that discovery happens at the same time. And then the impact component. So really quickly, adversaries can go in, execute these kind of large scale attacks and be incredibly impactful to the organization. And we'll show an example of a similar attack here shortly. But the big thing that surprised me the most in cloud is just the speed at which some of these attacks can take place. And that's one of the examples we'll highlight in a few slides. But one of the things I also want to highlight here is good hygiene of your cloud environment. If we go to the next slide, it'll actually show a couple changes here that can be taken to make it harder for an adversary to perform these attacks that quickly. Now, a lot of incidents we investigate, initial access is kind of all they need. They get the keys. Those keys already have just full scope admin access to the cloud environment, so they don't even have to do a whole lot from there. But if you're setting your environments up appropriately, you have restricted access through your identity access management policies, you're going to force them through additional aspects that they're going to have to do in order to perform a successful attack. So they might have to establish some form of persistence. They might have to elevate their privileges. They may have to access other credentials. And all of those are going to give you additional points of potentially being able to catch this adversary before they get too far along the line and actually have that full impact on your environment. Now, also in impact, there's a lot of different ways ransomware can be executed within cloud. They don't necessarily have to access your EC2s or any of the systems directly to actually encrypt all these contents. One of the ones we've seen is S3 just being encrypted using customer managed keys. The scary thing with those is none of the keys actually transpire through Amazon. So there's no way anyone but the attacker can actually help you recover your content unless you have really good backups and things of that nature. So that really comes down to having that solid security posture in the beginning pays dividends in the long run, even if an adversary is able to get into your cloud management plane and execute some of these attacks. So shifting base from ransomware, I want to talk briefly about what Lacework does. Now, if we go to the next slide here, we'll highlight kind of Lacework's core technology is the polygraph data platform. And this is kind of how we baseline these behaviors and build trends of activity that we see all the time in the environment and are able to pick up on deviations from that baseline. And the thing I really like about this is within cloud, it's actually doable. Now, all of us have seen a lot of AI and ML kind of algorithm sort of approaches to security over the years, but it's hard to do when you're looking at, say, like my laptop and picking up on differences there, because I'm doing different stuff today than I did yesterday. And so it's very hard to do there. But in cloud, it's much more similar in a lot of environments to what you'd see in like a point of sale environment, where it's always doing these specific sets of things. And if it deviates from that, those are items we want to know about. And that's kind of the whole approach we take to our detection aspect of things. Now, we do cover a lot of other components as well. Lacework does vulnerability management. We do security posture and compliance management. User and resource activity monitoring. And really this all centers around being able to tie, do you have a vulnerable application, such as detecting like a log4j sort of vulnerable Java application, combining that with, is it making outbound calls and talking to things it's never talked to before? Okay, now that's an event we should elevate and raise this up as something that the SOC should be made aware of. Now, regardless, as much of this as we can highlight and really elevate, that's where I think Red Canary is so key, is working with the managed security provider, because we're able to, have them actually take a deep look at this and really understand the core meanings behind what these events, actually triggered from. And that can make a significant difference in kind of the ability to detect and respond to these things, while also minimizing the noise that can be generated from a lot of these alerts over time. Now, so that's kind of the baseline of what we do within Lacework. We ingest the data, we analyze the data, correlate the events, and ultimately try to empower the SOC with very contextualized events, and not too many alerts. You're not going to get an alert when every single little thing is happening. You're going to see this thing happen, and then this thing happened. Now it's something that maybe is a high severity event that you should look into. But really, I think partnering with Red Canary is something we're very excited about, because they're bringing that additional knowledge and insight to this to really help our shared customers in this battle. Because honestly, a lot of this is very complex, especially when you get into like privilege escalation techniques in the cloud and things like that, where you really need people who understand this at a very deep level to kind of help be in your corner, so to speak. So one of the things I want to highlight in this next slide really is a kind of scary attack that we saw. So this gets back at one of Matt's points he talked to in the earlier slides about credential leakage. One of the most common things I would say every company has dealt with at some level, at some point in time. Now, this one was pretty impressive to me simply because of the speed of the whole end-to-end attack and defense that took place. So breaking down kind of what you're looking at here, this is a view of the Lacework polygraph, and this is showing a attack that took place because someone had accidentally committed their AWS credentials, their secret key, to their GitHub repo. And the crazy thing to me was, in seconds after this was committed, the key was leveraged, and the adversary logged into their environment and immediately mapped out a bunch of components. They did some initial scripted reconnaissance, and then immediately spun up, you can see down here, 37 GPU instances. Now, what's real scary with that is, even if you let this run for simply an hour, that could be an insanely expensive bill. Now, some of the most damaging attacks like this I've seen haven't even been impacting companies. It's in individual users, which is terrifying. So you're thinking like, oh, you accidentally put your own keys to your own AWS environment out there. Someone gets into your environment and does this. You could be liable for like a $50,000 bill before you even know anything happened. So pretty scary impact here. When you see just how quickly this took place. Now, the cool thing with this, you can see, everything kind of spun up. They did their reconnaissance. They were coming in through Amsterdam. So you can essentially see their initial mapping and spinning up of these EC2 instances. You can also see a bunch of unauthorized activity, which, when you see a lot of these combined events, should be that first indicator that, okay, someone's poking around, someone's doing reconnaissance, and none of this ever happens in a normal kind of scenario. So all items that should trip the sensors, and which for us it did fire alerts, fortunately. But also, and if we go to the next slide, I can talk through kind of Amazon's response, because I have to give a shout out to Amazon here, because they were on top of this. I've never seen such a quick response. But they essentially went and detected this key was leaked, because they were doing the same sort of GitHub scraping that the attacker was doing. And not even seconds after this attack had been initiated, AWS had placed that key into a quarantine policy and sent notifications to the customer saying, hey, like, we've quarantined this key, you should go check your stuff. But we saw it was leaked here, so we're blocking this so nothing happens. And fortunately, they did that because you can see the components I've highlighted here. The adversary, right after spinning up all those instances, attempted to create an access key, essentially a backdoor access key, because in AWS, you're able to have two keys associated to each account. This is so that you can make a new key, go through and change that out in all your scripts and everything, and then go and terminate the old key after you've made sure it's not going to break anything. But a lot of attackers take advantage of this by creating a secondary key and just leaving it in place as essentially a backdoor access component back into the environment. So fortunately, because of that response, they were able to deny this access before it got to that point of them persisting in this environment further, and essentially probably doing something a lot less overt that might not trip as many sensors going forward, but still charging the victim money over time. But not all cases are like this. This one was unique in that Amazon was looking at GitHub. There's a lot of different cases we've seen where keys are lifted and the same scenario happens, but there's no additional component like that Amazon has the ability to quickly check. One of the most common, I would say, is lifting keys from mobile applications. That's one of the areas where a lot of these keys are just baked directly into a lot of very prominent applications and can be lifted and used to access the environment. And there's many other ways as well, which is why I go back to kind of what I was saying before about leveraging an MDR such as Red Canary to really get on top of this and perform this same kind of quick and immediate response before the attacker can get too deep into the environment. And so with that, I want to pass back to Matt and talk more about what Red Canary does.
Thanks, Greg. In the next section, I'm going to walk you through Red Canary's MDR offering at a high level, feature by feature, break it down then how it works specifically with our Lacework integration. Then from there, go into some differentiators for us, especially in our security expert side, talk through the impact for the customer, the so what, and then walk through an actual demo of what this looks like in a live environment when a customer has both Red Canary and Lacework up and running. So the first top level, managed detection and response from Red Canary's overall goal is to ultimately protect your organization from cybersecurity breaches and identify and help you respond to them before they lead to material incidents that ultimately cause outages or cause material harm to your business. And the way that we do that is, first and foremost, offer 24/7 monitoring. We know when something's going wrong in your environment, day in or at night. We also deliver what we call advanced threat detection across your corporate environment. This is your normal managed endpoints and servers, your network infrastructure, your SaaS environment. This is your SaaS applications, your productivity apps, your identity sources, and cloud infrastructure, and leveraging security vendors like Lacework. And the way that we do that is by both looking at the security analytics coming out of those products and also providing context and linkages across the board to show you across multiple disparate technologies what happened when an attacker gained access to an endpoint, to an identity, and how then they leverage that access to do something more nefarious. We also have our team of threat investigators who investigate these potential threats. And then ultimately, this is all based on how do we help you respond? And that respond can be, the remediation, the investigation of a threat so that you can respond faster than the adversary can move. And then this is all wrapped around how do we help you prepare for the inevitable. And so how do we help testing and validation to give confidence that not only your people, but your security controls are working as you expect. As we click down into this to the next level, how this works specifically with Lacework. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a nice overview of kind of where the data would come from. So the first moving left to right, you integrate Lacework directly into the Red Canary security platform. From there, we can start feeding in alerts from the Lacework platform, raw telemetry generated from that data source as well. That then comes into our system. The Red Canary system then looks for potential threats that need to be surfaced to an analyst. So this is where a lot of our magic sauce takes place of how we identify and link disparate things together, and then we surface it up to a human for review. That human's job is then to make a determination of, is this threat real or is it not? And in the event that it is real, our job is then to hunt it down to root cause and to provide that context and a timeline of what happened. And then from there, working through how do we automate remediation so that you don't necessarily even have to get up out of bed. or you can even leverage the Red Canary team to do this for you. Now, how we differentiate ourselves is really in 4 key areas. And so the first one is our detection engineering team. This is the team of security experts. We can just click on the next, there we go. This is our team of security experts, and their job are ultimately to create the analytics, the detections that identify the suspicious activity in our customer environments. This is also the team that conducts the investigations into that suspicious activity when that detection fires. So not only are they the ones investigating it, they're the ones writing the detectors that flag it. We then have our detection enablement team. This is the group of threat researchers, the data scientists, our validation engineers who look at future-looking threats. So they're the ones who are working with folks like Greg and his team to identify, what are some of the threats coming in from cloud native and cloud native infrastructure that we can't yet detect. And how do we make sure that our customers are ultimately protected from these threats and validate that nothing gets missed in Red Canary? We also have our own intelligence team. And this team is made up of our intelligence and malware analysts. And the output of this group is your intelligence reports, things like in-product notifications to customers as new threats arise, and updates to our detections given what we know. So they're the ones who are really looking into, what's going on Twitter, on other places, and identifying the attack techniques that matter most to our customers, and then helping write relevant reports so our customers know when they see something from us, why it's relevant to them, and what else they should be looking at. And lastly, our incident handling team. This is the group that responds to threats in customer environments, and it's ultimately available 24/7. So if you get a threat from us, they're the ones who are there to help answer your questions, advise you, stand by your side, and ultimately help you through that remedial process. This team can also perform the hands-on keyboard remediations across our customer endpoints. And then finally, how this comes to the customer and what this means for them is, we've taken a lot of data. So this is an example of how a customer who's using Red Canary and Lacework gets data into us. So we take in the alerts, we take in telemetry, in this case, about 812 million records. From there, our analytics generated about 3,700 investigative leads. From there, we correlate, duplicate things down to what an analyst needs to review. In this case, it was about 2,500 analyzed events. From there, we determine what's false positive, what's been remediated and is not necessarily impactful versus what is. And that came down to 19 specific detections, 4 of which were deemed highly malicious. Using some back of the napkin rough math, if folks were going to try to do this themselves, it would cost roughly about $750,000 a year. And if you would choose to go to Red Canary, it would be a fraction of that cost. And so finally, let's take a look at a specific example. So the first thing we want to show here is the alert management feature of the security platform. And this is your single pane of glass for all security analytic data coming in from Lacework. And from this, we can start having Red Canary's own analysis on top of this. So this is the assigned to status and what we determine to be a threat and not a threat. So you see here, the top 2 were actually deemed to be a threat, and therefore were published as a threat from Red Canary. So let's go take a look at what a threat looks like from Red Canary on top of Lacework data. So you see the first thing at the top is just your top level summary, identifying what happened, what did it affect, who did it affect, how many endpoints, the identity, and a short sentence kind of really summarizing the activity itself. The real meat and potatoes of the threat is the threat timeline. And this is where you see the contextualization that both Greg and I talk through across disparate data sources that tell a single narrative. So in the next slide, what you're going to see here is a linkage of activity across native AWS activity, CrowdStrike in this example, and finally, the thing that set this whole thread off, which was a Lacework alert. So Lacework told Red Canary something took place in a customer's environment. We investigated it. We traced it back to root cause by looking at other data sources and creating a unified timeline, and ultimately published it out to the customer. The real benefit here being that the customer can look at this, understand the clear impact of who, what, where took place, how it was ultimately identified by Lacework, how Red Canary contextualized it, created a timeline, and then the customer can very easily go in and start taking remedial action. So suspending this user account, start undoing the things the attacker did so they can go back to a normal operational state very quickly. So in summary, I want to just deliver a quick call out to action. So Red Canary MDR on top of Lacework delivers amazing cloud detections and response 24/7. And so if you're already invested in Lacework and are looking for operational help, Red Canary is there to be your partner. And if you're already a Red Canary customer looking at ways to expand your coverage into your cloud environment, Lacework is a great option for that also. And with that, I think that concludes our portion of the webinar, and I'll hand it back to Adam for any Q&A.
Awesome. Great job, guys. Before we dive into Q&A, I did just post a poll question. So if anyone is interested in learning more about this joint solution, or if you're ready to schedule a demo, please let us know and we'll get you in contact with a representative this week. I'll leave that up for a few minutes, but let's get right to the questions. First question, if Lacework is using machine learning to add context and deliver refined alerts, what benefits would an MDR provide?
I can take this one, or go for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple options here. The first is just the necessity to respond quickly. And so Greg mentioned this too, like speed is paramount. And so even for alerts that have all of the context and all the data you could necessarily want, do you have someone there at 2 a.m. to respond between 2 and 2:15 before the attacker has deployed really expensive GPUs that are going to start crypto mining and causing you, a massive amount of billage and money? So that's kind of the first, is just the operationalization of 24/7 monitoring for someone to help you. And then second is, the expanded contextualization of, yes, that's probably a really great summary of everything that took place in that environment that we use, that Lacework used for identifying, contextualizing, and helping with that alert. But there could be more to that story. So is there information in the identity provider that shows how that identity was compromised? Did it come from an endpoint? Are there other leads to follow? And that's where a security partner like Red Canary can really help answer those questions.
And if I could add on, Matt, I think you hit on it real well in your last slide, I would say, where it shows the timeline, because you were highlighting a key piece of data that we don't always see on just the Lacework side, and that's what happened on the endpoint. How were these credentials obtained? Did they steal a local AWS credentials file? Were they running other commands that might impact the local network as well? As their cloud infrastructure from that endpoint? So tying those both together, I think, is very key, because we have all the telemetry from the cloud assets, but then Red Canary has visibility in both, the endpoints and those cloud assets, and being able to marry those together, I think, is tremendously valuable. And plus, like, as much as we can highlight these events and try and make sense of them within an automated kind of context through alerts, having that additional insight from actual analysts digging through this data and looking at this stuff every day across hundreds of different customers, it provides a lot deeper insight that I think can separate something that you might not know if this is something bad versus, okay, they've seen this a bunch of times as part of this attack chain. And so those kind of things, I think, add tremendous value to the overall kind of partnership.
Awesome. What would the additional expense be, if there is one, in Red Canary or Lacework to utilize this partnership if we already use both products?
In that case, I would recommend you to reach out to your account rep, your CSM, to help. It could be a very account specific answer. So I would say either we'll follow up with you, or you should follow up with your CSM or AE.
All right. Is there an XDR component of the Red Canary offering? Also, are agents required for EDR solution?
So let me answer for EDR, for the endpoint component of Red Canary's MDR offering. Yes, we leverage the endpoint detection and response agents for both the alerting and the raw telemetry coming from those devices. Secondarily, the XDR component, yes. So there's two ways that is serviced. One is through the alert management feature of the security platform. And the second, probably more important, is through the timeline itself. So the way that we link those disparate data sources together is through contextualization and XDR. So we pull out the relevant data fields and link them together so that when our analysts are reviewing an event, the system itself is telling them about other interesting activity, security analytics, data on the identity on the endpoint that may be related. And that's all driven by the XDR analysis that we're doing.
Besides configuration issues, what would you say is the most common vector that you've observed attacks against cloud infrastructure?
Ooh, I can take this one if you want, Matt. So essentially, I would say the mobile applications is kind of the most creative avenue I've seen. That's when we did some analysis when I first joined here. Actually, a guy, Michael Bentley, very sharp researcher. He had pulled a bunch of mobile apps and looked at them, very popular ones, to see how many just had keys just baked in. They were accessible if you reverse the applications. That one's kind of a scary one to me, especially because a lot of these keys that are accessible are full admin access to environments. We've also done a lot of hunting for this sort of thing, with VirusTotal. And a couple times we've actually found attackers' notes where they've documented keys that they've lifted from environments, and somehow those get picked up and scanned by VirusTotal. So we found some keys leaked that way. But I think, in general, one of the things I think is most interesting, aside from just the keys and all the different ways to obtain them, is just kind of the whole component of adversaries aren't really after information necessarily. And a lot of the attacks that we see in cloud, they're after just the infrastructure itself. They're trying to gain access to resources in order to monetize them as quickly and easily as possible. So oftentimes a lot of the traditional mindset of like, oh, I'm X company, so I'm not going to be impacted by hackers. It's like, no, you're like the perfect target because you don't care about this stuff. You're not watching it. And like they can pop your systems and you won't know until you get the bill a month later. So that's kind of the big thing is they're really going after the infrastructure itself. And we've seen tons of creative ways attackers have done this. One was leveraging lambdas to do crypto mining, the most inefficient use of lambdas possible. Insanely expensive too. But the thing is, these attackers don't care about the cost to you. They can go ahead and make, $800 or so and cost you 10 grand to run these lambdas. It's really, they don't care at that time. And so I think that's the biggest thing is just that trend to me is really just attackers going after infrastructure directly and really not even caring at all about stealing information and data and more traditional things we kind of associate with cybercrime.
What do we have to do to connect the two products?
Thankfully, it's a pretty simple integration. There's just a couple of data fields we need. We need some permissions and access and an API key. And the configuration is relatively straightforward directly within Red Canary. This is something that's going to be going live here by the end of the month. And along with documentation and help, there'll be a walkthrough of exactly what you need to do in order to enable the integration.
If I'm understanding correctly, you can detect YubiKey authentication anomalies. What other MFA anomalies can be detected? Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator.
Yeah, I'd say the other one that's more common for us that we see a lot is the MFA exhaustion attacks. And so identifying when that's taking place and whether or not it was successful or not. This is, and then beyond that, some of the impossible travel type of detections are also, a good way of identifying the results of some of those attacks. But the MFA exhaustion is the one, at least, that we see most often.
Yeah, I would have to agree, Matt. And we saw a very public one of those attacks just very recently. Unfortunately, I feel, definitely thoughts with the team dealing with that right now. But it shows how successful this kind of attack can be. And MFA exhaustion is just, one of the many tricks we've seen out there. Also the phishing sites, the man in the middle sort of attacks to steal MFA tokens. Attackers are very creative in this sense. And one of the things I really like, though, is if you have standardized multi-factor in place, if someone compromises an account and then sets up an additional multi-factor authentication that's not something that's approved or not something you've seen, that could be an indicator in and of itself.
I think we got a follow up to what you just said. Is that something that MLAI could be identifying and preventing?
I think so. I mean, right now we're really focused on abuses of activities that happen in cloud specifically. So looking at AWS and identity access management attacks and things of that nature. But yeah, the exhaustion attacks, I think that's something that someone should look into. I don't know if that's in our wheelhouse. But I mean, one of those things really is set up like FIDO 2FA, as a means to prevent a lot of multi-factor attacks. And that's something very easy and quick that a lot of companies can do that will give companies a lot more security around their multi-factor authentication.
What about playbooks? Can those be run in Red Canary from the Lacework alerts?
Yep, ultimately that is exactly what the goal of automation is. And so as Lacework alerts come in and get triaged or get escalated, we can appropriately run, automation playbooks that optimize your team's time and bandwidth. So that could be generate notifications, remediation, really there's a limitless number of things you can link up to it. That would be the trigger that would then cause a playbook that you would configure to run.
All right, we'll do one more here. What are most adversaries after when targeting the cloud management plane?
I would go back to infrastructure. That's kind of the big thing is they're just looking to gain access to as many resources as possible to monetize. And so if they can compromise the cloud management plane, they can do almost anything from there. You've seen a lot of creative attacks like backdoored Lambda functions, things like that, where if you send a special crafted request to the application, it'll run this Lambda, not the current one. A lot of real sneaky things that can be done in cloud once an attacker's in there. So really detecting them before they get to that point where they can really implant themselves is so key. But oftentimes, a lot of the ones we do investigate, I would say, are often a lot of script kiddies who really are just going out there and throwing like Python and Bash scripts at hosts that they gain access to that just downloads and installs their own custom miners. They have done some creative things now to get around some of the detections Amazon has built in directly to pick up on these and block these, such as proxying their mining traffic through another domain that's not on threat lists and things like that, recompiling XM rigs so it's not going to trigger any heuristics in that sense, and kind of everything in between. But in general, if you're watching your CPU usage and getting alerts like billing guardrails is something I would definitely recommend everyone puts in place around their cloud infrastructure. It should give you kind of early warnings about these attacks going on.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for submitting all the great questions and for participating in our Q&A. Just a few reminders here before we conclude. Remember to check your inbox later today for your $5 coffee gift card redemption for attending, as well as the recording, which will be sent out to you later this week. We also have a quick 20-second survey once you exit the webinar. We appreciate your feedback as we're always looking to improve our webinars. I'd like to thank both Matt and Greg for their presentation. And if anyone has questions on content covered in today's webinar, please don't hesitate to email webinars@redcanary.com. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.